All the world's a stage, and all the men and women in it merely players. The navigator. What are we navigating? And is all the world a stage? And are all the men and women in it merely players? What is the story that we're part of? How hard a focus should we be having on it? How soft a focus should we allow? Where should we ask the question? And who should we ask the question for? If we've learned anything, it's that life takes us continuously in unexpected directions, like unexpected storms or droughts. We have no choice over it, but we're affected by it. So the question of the navigator is, well, how do I navigate this? How do I navigate this storm of life, this strange question of what does it mean to be human? That's why here, and I feel now the mythic surging of the story that is that when I was told in the beginning of all of this, all of the painting, all of the storytelling, that the last flood was water and that this flood is information. And that we're drowning essentially with a sense of I can never find a way back to how do I navigate this story? Where I'm standing here in my home, but at the threshold, on the Grail Cross, we're going to see a story about stepping into alignment. Because the question of home, the question of this being our greater metaphor, is that the question here that I asked wasn't what's wrong with the neighbor, wasn't what's wrong with the world. The world is always going through difficult conditions. So the question for me was, well, how do I navigate that condition? And that's where so much of this, and here at the threshold of the stairs, we ascend here, and if we wish, we can step into the dark, or we can turn a corner and ascend. Why this is important as a type of foundational structure for our psyche and our psychology is that this is actually saying that the navigator in us must find our way home. That's what I had to find as the questions I needed to ask were not questions that the culture was interested in, but I needed to know these things. And I believe that that's the human call, that the world of distraction doesn't have place or need for it to be navigated. It exists in a state of chaos. So the questions for us become, well, where can I at least put a story that there are different levels to my own mind? And here, what is helpful, because it is home, is the question of where do I feel safe? If I live in a dangerous world, that's what you have to ask as a painter. I began painting in my home because I recognized that the questions I was asking weren't popular or interesting to others, but they had to be that to me, because this is where I live. And I feel if we can create coherence where we live, suddenly where we live, like this home, will start to relate to the story of the intimacy of our psychology. Not a general sense of psychology of, oh, you know what other people need or you know what they're like, but what are you like? In the same way that I am different from you, you're different from another person. If you think from an orchestra's point of view, that's beautiful because you're a different instrument, different sound. Or from a gardener's point of view, a different plant, a different quality. But when we think from a home, we also think from a family's point of view. We start to think about, well, if I'm navigating, am I navigating alone? Not if you have a family. Am I making decisions about the world, about what I'm for or against, as though that will actually resonate with the responsibilities I have? No, that's just like talking at the ocean on deck. It has no effect. What has an effect, though, is where I begin to tell the story from. And that's what this art and this environment now embodies. It's not a concept, it's an embodiment. Meaning that when art, the language of creation, returns us home to our own threshold, creating the Grail Cross that allows us to stand at its center, to stand upright on ancestral ground, we start to recognize that maybe all the movement away, all the navigating away, was to bring us back to a center, so that the world will turn like the seasons and the chaos. But as it does, we will grow more and more coherent. And that's what's happened here. And I don't believe that everyone has to do the same thing. I think examples of possibility are the very thing that allows us as human beings to say, well, why not this as well? And when we speak about navigating in the Navigator, we navigate by what we allow to be possible. And oftentimes you'd say, oh, but it's impossible. Well, take that impossibility one day at a time. And don't look at the forest, but allow yourself to enter one step, one moment. And like this home, like this art, like this life, you'll have a moment where you can look back and begin to see a mosaic that makes a great deal of sense. That everything in life brings you back to what you love and what you value. Because the greatest sadness when people leave this world is that they spent their whole life climbing a ladder only to realize it was on the wrong building and it was never where they lived. They were always trying to get somewhere else because they didn't think something inside of them was of any great value. But I say here, if you don't have to shout at the neighbor, if you don't have to convince the other, then cultivate something you can live with. And if people don't like it, like cooking dinner for them, say, fine, we won't have dinner then. I wish you well. And that's how it is in my home. We'll have dinner together. We'll talk. We'll inspire each other. Because the truth of navigating is, tell me what you love. Tell me who you are. Tell me where your passion to be alive dwells. And I'll start to help you find your inner navigator. Just like my inner navigator needed me to tell the story of what it means to finally be home. Not for others, but for oneself. I can live with this story. And as a matter of fact, I do.